Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 201. Clinic of Secrets. After their conversation, Ethan finally understood why they had ended up at the clinic. The three of them, Leroy, Ryan, and Evelyn, had grown up together, bound by shared history rather than blood. Leroy and Ryan had been taken in by Evelyn's father, who had given them their names, but they were still young when they were sent away to live at the Mercer Wellness Center. Evelyn's parents had vanished without a trace. Their mentor, her grandfather, Dr. Aldrich Mercer, was the real mastermind behind the clinic. A year ago, he had suddenly disappeared, leaving the three of them to fend for themselves. Dr. Aldrich had always been an odd man. He would only see 3 patients a day, and he refused to treat anything that wasn't rare or uniquely complex. Over time, fewer and fewer people came to the clinic. After all, how many strange, inexplicable illnesses could there really be? Still, his reputation had carried weight, and those desperate enough sought him out from far and wide. But when he disappeared, so did the patients. Those who came looking for him left disappointed, and with no money coming in, Evelyn, Leroy, and Ryan had to come up with a way to survive. That's when they started impersonating Dr. Aldrich. For the past year, they had kept the Mercer Wellness Center alive through a mix of trickery and real expertise. Evelyn had studied medicine under her grandfather, and despite her young age, she was already an energy user. Her abilities had awakened naturally when she was just 12, without training, without rituals, without struggle. A prodigy in the purest sense. Ethan and Victor exchanged a look of silent awe. Her energy bore the same signature as Dr. Aldrich's, a rare, restorative force that made her treatments unnaturally effective. She had also mastered the Mercer family's needle technique, which allowed her to treat even the most baffling conditions with precision and ease. Leroy, the eldest, was an anomaly in his own right. He was a mutant, just as Ethan had suspected. His heightened sense of smell, often dismissed as a joke about having a bloodhound's nose, was just one of his traits. He had also inherited Dr. Aldrich's combat skills, making him the most dangerous fighter of the three. Ryan, the second brother, had studied the mystical arts under Dr. Aldrich. It was Ryan who had used those 3 paper figures to block Ethan's soul sense for over an hour. That alone was enough to intrigue Ethan. Unlike the others, Ryan had no innate abilities. He was just an ordinary man who had achieved extraordinary things through sheer mastery of the arcane. Ethan found himself even more fascinated by Dr. Aldrich himself. The man had been a polymath, a physician, a warrior, and a master of the supernatural. A real-life legend, one of those figures you only ever saw in fantasy movies. When Evelyn and her brothers caught wind of the 4 mysterious cases at the hospital, they decided to step in. But the moment Ryan entered the room, he knew this wasn't the work of some wandering spirit. The patients weren't just victims of an unfortunate supernatural encounter. They had been marked. Someone had infected them with ghost parasites, creatures bred through dark rituals to feed on human hosts. The only way to save them was to find the person responsible. Simply expelling the parasites wouldn't be enough. If they did, the curse caster would sense it, and things would get ugly fast. People who practiced this kind of magic weren't exactly known for their forgiving nature. So, Evelyn used her needles to extract a few of the parasites, and Leroy tracked the remnants of their energy back to the source. That's how they ended up crossing paths with Ethan and Victor. Originally, they had planned to gather information and report the details to the 9th Division. If the 9th Division handled it, even if the curse caster escaped, they wouldn't come after the 3 of them. Plus, they could earn money from both sides, charging the clients and collecting a bounty from the 9th Division without having to face any danger. After hearing their plan, Ethan couldn't help but laugh. They've got quite the scheme going, he thought. No danger and you still get paid? Just how much do you love money? Ethan couldn't help but think. It wasn't surprising that he felt this way. He had no idea that in this world, people with special abilities were often treated worse than ordinary people. Ordinary citizens had the protection of the law, but those with special abilities were branded as dangerous. Even something as simple as finding a job or living a normal life was nearly impossible for them. If they were caught doing anything that could be perceived as a threat to public safety, the consequences were severe. At best, they'd be eliminated. At worst, they'd be sent to special laboratories for inhumane experiments. And the ones carrying out these orders were organizations like the Ninth Division. For rogue individuals with special abilities, these organizations were like the heavens, absolute and unyielding. Ethan was still new to the supernatural world, and there was much he didn't understand, but perhaps it was precisely because he didn't understand that he was willing to challenge it. Since you're from the Ninth Division, you can handle this. You deal with the source of the problem, and we'll take care of treating the victims. Now let's talk about payment, Leroy said, finishing his explanation. Evelyn, who had been silent until now, chimed in. She didn't have a good impression of Ethan. Not only had he been spying on her earlier, but the fact that he was from the Ninth Division made her dislike him even more. She had always suspected that her parents' disappearance, and even her grandfather's, was connected to the Ninth Division. When she saw Ethan's credentials and realized he was the deputy leader of the M Squad, her dislike only deepened. Money isn't an issue, Ethan said. But are you sure the person behind this is inside? Leroy paused, his nose twitching slightly as he nodded. The residual energy from the ghost parasites definitely leads here. But what? Ethan asked, noticing his hesitation. But why would the curse caster let them go so easily? And why would they leave such an obvious trail leading here? The Ninth Division isn't incompetent. If I can find this place, they'd have no trouble tracking it down either, Leroy explained slowly. He's right, Victor chimed in. This whole thing feels off. Who cares? Let's just smash the place and see what happens, Ethan said, standing up. Smash it. Everyone stared at him in disbelief. Yeah, smash it. Victor and Williams exchanged a glance, seemingly understanding Ethan's plan. Leroy and Ryan looked hesitant, but Evelyn's eyes lit up with excitement. Leroy stood up to stop Ethan. Maybe we should just leave. Ethan paused, then nodded. All right, you guys can go if you want. He walked out of the private booth with Victor and Williams following closely behind. What's there to be afraid of? Let them do their thing. We can just watch the show. If you want to leave, go ahead. Ryan will stay with me. Right? Evelyn said, clinging to Ryan's arm. Ryan, who had been silent the entire time, could only sigh in resignation. Once Ethan and the others were outside, they had no idea what was happening inside the booth. Victor leaned in and asked quietly, Ethan, are you trying to get the Ninth Division's attention so we can make contact with them? Ethan nodded calmly. Yeah, I need to get in touch with them as soon as possible. November 26th is just a few days away. Lila's waiting for me. As they whispered outside, they had no idea that inside the booth, Leroy's ears twitched, and his expression suddenly changed. Chapter 202, Illusion. Ethan, Victor, and Williams, along with head back first. Call me if anything comes up, Ethan said, not giving JJ a chance to protest as he shoved him into the cab. The cab had barely started rolling when Evelyn bolted out of the diner. Right behind her, Leroy and Ryan lunged forward, trying to grab her, but she slipped right past them. Ethan frowned and subtly noted his head at Evelyn as she sprinted toward him. Evelyn paused, then put on a fierce expression. You think you can just leave without paying? She barked. Leroy and Ryan, hearing her words, stopped in their tracks and stood behind her, eyeing Ethan and the others nervously. Victor and Williams exchanged confused glances, unsure what to make of the strange trio. Ethan's response, however, was even stranger. He lowered his voice and muttered, No time to leave now. Without waiting for a response, he added, louder this time, Then let's begin. The moment those words, in an instant Ethan moved. Less than 4 meters away stood a seemingly harmless college student, casually holding his phone by the roadside. Ethan, now in his panther form, appeared behind the man in a flash. Switching forms, he brought down a bear's claw strike directly onto the man's head. Thud. The man's skull shattered under the force of Ethan's blow. Victor and Williams froze. What the hell was Ethan doing? Had he lost his mind? Why was he killing someone in broad daylight? Before the man's body even hit the ground, blood splattered everywhere. Before Victor and Williams could react, Ethan was already moving again. This time, his target was a little girl across the street, no older than 7 or 8. Ethan! Ethan, stop! But their voices were too slow. Ethan darted across the road, grabbed the girl by the neck, and lifted her off the ground. His grip was so tight that the girl's face turned purple as she struggled to breathe. Just then, two people burst out of a nearby diner, screaming, "Murder! He's—" Before they could finish, a golden light shot from Evelyn's fingertip, silencing them mid-sentence. Though not fatal, the spell left them unable to speak. Leroy sucked in a sharp breath. "Evelyn, what's the problem? Since the 9th Division already involved us in this, you think they'd just let us walk away? Whether we act or not, the result's the same." Her eyes burned with defiance. "They set this up. We were never meant to leave here alive." By now, even Victor and Williams finally pieced it together. This wasn't random, they'd walked into a trap. And Ethan had known. Ethan's grip tightened around the girl's throat. His voice was low, dangerous. "Enough games. Come out, or I snap her neck." Poof! The little girl's form shimmered, her limbs twisting unnaturally before shrinking. Her ears grew pointed, fine fur sprouting along the sides of her face. Her pupils thinned into vertical slits. She was no child at all. A fox mutant? But Ethan wasn't fooled by her cute appearance. The way her eyes were rolling back made it clear he wasn't holding back. Just then, the entire street transformed. It had been a bright afternoon, just past 2 o'clock. But in an instant, everything went dark. The street was eerily quiet, devoid of any people. The people who had run from the diner stopped near the Denver. They turned toward the entrance, only to find the security gate warped and the glass door inside shattered. A sickening stench of blood seeped from within. Then, two figures stepped out from the shadows of the shop. A man and a woman. The man, in his 30s, wore only boxer shorts and flip-flops, as if he had just walked out of a bathhouse. His skin was slick with moisture, and he carried himself with lazy indifference. The woman, however, was dressed for a different kind of business. Tiny denim shorts, a crop top, and heavy makeup. Her style belonged to an era long past, the kind of streetwalker look that had all but disappeared from modern cities. For a woman well into her 40s or 50s, it was a sight that made Ethan's stomach turn. "Heh, didn't think Celeste's little crew would be so sharp. How'd you sniff us out? Our little fox has never failed before." "Cut the bullshit," Ethan snapped. "What the hell do you want?" Annoyed at being interrupted, the woman's smile vanished. Her eyes turned cold. "Humph. Celeste betrayed us, and you, her little lackeys, aren't any better. I'll just take you all in for questioning." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "So this was about Celeste? You targeted my friends just to lure us here?" he asked, his voice low. The man in flip-flops chuckled. "Don't flatter yourself. Snatching you up was just a bonus. We've been after the Cursecaster operating here for a while now. But right when we were about to move in, we realized her real target was you." The man grinned, eyes glinting with amusement. "Funny, isn't it? We figured we'd just let her little plan play out." Ethan's stomach twisted. Cursecaster? His mind raced. Someone had been targeting him specifically? Why? He didn't even know who his enemies were anymore. Victor, Williams, and Evelyn had silently stepped up beside him. The woman giggled, watching Ethan's puzzled expression. "Looks like you don't even know who's after you." She turned toward the shattered storefront and called out, "Come on out, dear." Everyone's eyes followed her gaze. A white, ghostly figure slowly emerged from the shadows. When Ethan saw the figure, he was stunned. "Just as I thought," Ryan muttered under his breath, breaking his usual silence. "What?" Evelyn asked. Everyone except Ethan turned to look at him. Ryan, usually shy, blushed slightly and explained, "Only a spirit can raise ghost parasites. That's what grandfather said. I've never actually seen one before." "Oh!" Evelyn's mood darkened at the mention of their grandfather. "How is it you?" Ethan stammered, staring at the ghostly figure in disbelief. "Ethan, I curse you to die a horrible death." The spirit lunged at Ethan, her voice filled with venom. Crack! The woman flicked her wrist, and a whip lashed. The whip, made of some unknown material, seemed to affect the spirit as if it were a physical entity. "Behave yourself or I'll destroy you right here," the woman barked, yanking the spirit back to her feet with a sharp tug of the whip. The spirit, now more transparent from the attack, glared at Ethan with pure hatred, as if she wanted to tear him apart with her bare hands. Ethan stared back, unable to comprehend how, in just over 2 months, she had become like this. Chapter 20. The spirit was translucent and blurry, but Ethan could still make out who it was. It was Jade Taylor, the very woman who had driven him to buy out the gym and fire her in a fit of anger. No matter how hard he tried to wrap his head around it, he never imagined he'd see her again like this 2 months later. She was no longer human. She was a spirit, which meant she was dead. How had she died? If she's destroyed, those 4 in the hospital are done for too. Ryan muttered from behind Ethan. Everyone turned to him, puzzled. He continued, I miscalculated. She wasn't raising the ghost parasites. She was the parasite. Someone turned her into a broodmother. If the person who turned her is killed, the parasites become wild. Over time, they'll fade away on their own. The infected can be cured if treated in time. But if the broodmother is killed, the parasites go berserk. They'll devour each other until only one remains, becoming the new broodmother or king. During this process, the 4 in the hospital will be eaten alive, their flesh and even their souls consumed by the parasites. After Ryan finished speaking, he fell silent again. Ethan's mind, however, was in turmoil. Jade had fallen into the enemy's hands. Regardless of how she died, she was someone he had known, and now the lives of his 4 roommates were tied to her fate. Why did she hate him so much? Was it just because he had fired her? If he wanted to find out the truth and save his friends, the only way was to rescue Jade first. But how? That was the problem. Earlier, Ethan thought he had the upper hand. He had taken down one enemy and captured another, their illusionist no less. When they arrived, they had been caught in an illusion. It was supposed to be just past 2 in the afternoon, but in reality, it was already past 5, and the sky had darkened. Yet, in the illusion, time had barely moved. Now, with Jade's spirit appearing, Ethan's advantage was slipping away. He was hesitant to act, fearing the consequences. The fox girl in his hand, having been held loosely for a while, suddenly stirred awake. She thrashed violently, shouting, Let me go! Let me go! I'll kill you! Ethan glanced at her, then lifted her up, addressing the older woman. How about a trade? You hand her over to me, and I'll let your fox go. The older woman struck a pose she clearly thought was seductive and let out a cackling laugh. Not a chance. Bringing back a parasite controller means more reward for me, and with 2 fewer people to split it with, I should be thanking you, sweetheart. Her words left Ethan stunned. He scanned the faces of the others, but none of them showed any reaction. Not even the fox girl in his hand seemed shocked by what the woman had said. What was going on? Ethan's eyes turned cold. Is this what the 9th Division is like? He thought. They don't care about their own teammates' lives? In fact, their expressions suggested this was normal to them. What kind of people were they, claiming to protect others while being so heartless? If this was what the 9th Division was really like, then maybe it wasn't worth staying. The woman had just mentioned bringing the parasite controller back. This meant they weren't planning to destroy Jade's spirit right away. Once Ethan figured this out, he didn't hesitate any longer. With the agility of his panther form, he moved like a blur, almost teleporting across the space. At the same time, he hurled the fox girl in his hand like a cannonball toward the man in slippers. The 4 enemies were caught off guard by Ethan's sudden attack. Even Victor and the others hadn't expected it. The opposing group was no pushover, though. The older woman flicked her whip, sending Jade's spirit flying to the side. The man in slippers kicked the fox girl mid-air, sending her crashing to the ground with a sickening crunch of bones. This time, Ethan was fighting in the real world, and he noticed something astonishing. His speed was far beyond what it had been back in Ravenwood. It felt as though his gear from Ethereal wasn't just boosting his in-game stats. It was enhancing his real-world abilities too. The increase in speed was like the difference between wielding Twilight War Spear in the game and fighting without it. This realization sent a surge of exhilaration through him. Someone once said, "In combat, speed is everything." With a subtle shift of his body, Ethan dodged the older woman's whip and closed the distance in an instant. He swung his hand, aiming for a slap. Ethan wasn't sure when he'd developed a fondness for slapping people, but he found it incredibly effective. It was fast, accurate, and oddly satisfying. Maybe it was because he'd spent so much time playing as a feral druid in the game, constantly swiping with claw attacks. Or maybe it was just the sheer joy of delivering a good solid slap. Either way, it felt damn good. But when his hand connected with the woman's face, a puff of white smoke erupted, accompanied by a sharp, acrid scent. Ethan recoiled, leaping back several steps and covering his nose. What the hell? Poison? He thought. A moment later he noticed something strange. The woman's face looked lopsided. Normally, the side that got slapped would swell up, but with her it was the opposite. The side he hadn't hit was raised, while the slapped side remained flat. Upon closer inspection, he realized he'd just wiped off half her makeup, foundation, blush, and whatever else she'd caked on. No wonder his hand felt greasy. Ethan looked down at his palm, now coated in a thick layer of white powder. He clapped his hands together, sending clouds of the stuff into the air. It reminded him of gymnasts dusting their hands with chalk before gripping the parallel bars. Ah! The woman let out a piercing scream, clutching her slapped cheek. She pointed her whip at Ethan, trembling with rage. You bastard! I haven't taken my makeup off in over a decade, and you dare slap me. Today, I'm going to drain you dry. What are you all staring at? Kill them! As she shrieked, her whip suddenly burst into black flames. Cold, soul-chilling flames that seemed to freeze the very air around them. At the same time, everyone on her side sprang into action. Victor and Williams charged forward, intercepting the two people who had emerged from the diner earlier. Leroy hesitated for a moment, then transformed. His ears, nose, and claws elongated, taking on the appearance of a massive wolf. He moved swiftly, blocking the man in slippers. Ethan, meanwhile, lunged at the older woman. In an instant, the battlefield had shifted into a series of one-on-one duels. Chapter 204, Lunar's Wrath. The older woman knew Ethan was fast, so she began whipping her weapon in a circular motion, creating a defensive barrier around herself. Ethan tried several times to break through but was repeatedly blocked. During one attempt, the tip of her whip grazed his arm, sending a searing, burning pain through him. The combination of icy cold and burning heat was baffling. What kind of ability was this? For the first time, Ethan's prize speed was being countered by what felt like a damn porcupine. Meanwhile, Evelyn and Ryan, who had been standing still, were now just spectators. Brother's getting wrecked. Why don't you go help him? Evelyn pushed Ryan from behind. I don't fight. Ryan stammered awkwardly. Evelyn face-bombed, exasperated. Her second brother was actually nearly as skilled as Leroy in combat, but he was a coward when it came to fighting outsiders. During their sparring sessions, he had no problem holding his own, but against real opponents he froze up. Ironically, he was always fascinated and ready to explore strange and terrifying supernatural phenomena he encountered, but only if someone else was with him. Looks like we might not need to help after all, Ryan mumbled, watching the chaos unfold. On the opposing side, the older woman was clearly their leader and the strongest. Even Ethan was struggling to take her down. The man in slippers wasn't far behind her in skill. He was currently dogfighting, literally. His limbs stretched like rubber, and he was using them to flail at Leroy, who had transformed into a massive wolf. Leroy kept getting thrown into walls, but his wolf form seemed to dull his sense of pain. The more he was beaten, the more relentless he became, charging at the man like a rabid animal. On another front, one of the men was facing off against Williams. Despite Williams' reputation for dominating Ethan in the boxing ring, he was now being overpowered. The fourth opponent was up against Victor. Normally the weakest in close combat among the three, Victor was surprisingly holding his own today. His wide, powerful strikes left his opponent with no room to counter. These two opponents weren't using any special abilities, likely holding back in case Victor or Williams decided to unleash theirs. After Ryan's comment, Evelyn rolled her eyes. Bro, are you blind? We're clearly losing here. If you won't help, I will. With a flick of her wrist, a golden needle appeared between her fingers. Boom! Just as she was about to strike, Ethan, who had been backing away, suddenly reached toward the sky. Damn it, you old hag, you think I don't have ranged attacks, Ethan thought angrily. If you looked closely, you could see a faint, ghostly image of an owl behind Ethan. It mimicked his movements, its tiny wings outstretched, pointing toward the moon. Lunar beam. A column of light descended from the sky, carrying the image of the moon itself. It crashed into the swirling barrier created by the woman's whip. The impact was deafening, but there was no dust, no shockwave, just an eerie stillness. The older woman stood frozen, her whip still mid-swing. Everyone stopped fighting, their eyes fixed on her. Even Ethan was curious about the damage he'd just inflicted. Pop! A soft sound, like a bubble bursting, echoed through the air. And just like that, The older woman shattered into pieces, dissipating into nothingness. Her whip, made of some strange material, vanished along with her. The man in slippers and the other two opponents instantly paled. The other two men glanced at Ethan, then turned and bolted. Williams and Victor immediately moved to intercept, refusing to let them escape. Suddenly, the two enemies began fighting with desperate intensity. The man who Williams took on waved his hand, and a barrage of ice spikes shot toward him. Williams hadn't expected such a sudden attack. He dodged and weaved, trying to avoid the incoming spikes, but there were too many. One of the spikes headed straight for his heart. He had no choice but to block it with his palm. Thud, the ice spike pierced through his hand, lodging itself deep within. Blood and muscle instantly froze. William's face twisted in pain. Seeing this, Ethan flashed to the man's side and swung his hand toward the man's head. The man reacted quickly, summoning an ice shield with a flick of his eyes. Crack, smash. The shield shattered like glass, offering no protection whatsoever. Ethan's palm connected with the man's skull, and his head exploded like a watermelon. Despite being in panther form, Ethan's strength had nearly doubled thanks to the legendary weapon he'd acquired in the game. The force of his strike sent the headless body flying, tumbling across the ground before finally coming to a stop. Ethan staggered slightly, a sharp pain piercing his mind. He suddenly realized that his soul energy was nearly depleted, to the point where he could barely sense it. Strangely, the tiny sprout within him remained unaffected. Was it the lunar beam spell that drained my soul energy? He wondered. Does that mean the abilities of the owl form in the real world were tied to soul energy? The thought flashed through his mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. On the other side, the man in slippers had forced Leroy back and was now retreating, clearly planning to escape. Ethan couldn't let that happen. Seeing that Victor had his opponent under control, Ethan took off after the man in slippers. As he passed the entrance of the den, he caught a glimpse of Jade's shadowy figure darting inside. He hesitated for a moment, then shouted over his shoulder, "Ryan, catch her for me!" Ethan knew Ryan specialized in mystical arts and had experience dealing with spirits and curses. Ryan, who had been standing nearby, blinked in confusion before understanding Ethan's request. He called back, "Not for less than 10 grand. Ethan nearly tripped mid-sprint. He hadn't expected Ryan, of all people, to suddenly start haggling. But he didn't have time to argue. "Fine," he yelled back, then continued chasing the man in slippers. The man's limbs moved like springs, allowing him to leap and bound in ways that defied normal movement. In no time he had scaled a building and was running across the rooftops. Ethan kept his soul sense locked onto the man, pursuing him from the ground. He didn't believe the guy could stay up there forever. 10 grand? How much are you giving me? Evelyn chimed in, looking at Ryan. "The 10 grand is mine," Ryan replied matter-of-factly. "Then you can do it yourself," Evelyn said, rolling her eyes. "I won't. I'm scared," Ryan said, still completely serious. "Then make it 20 grand, and I'll go with you," Evelyn countered. "Fine. No less than 20 grand, then," Ryan agreed. By now, Ethan was long gone, but Leroy added, "You two keep bickering, and we won't even get the 10 grand. Leroy, rubbing his swollen face from the earlier beating, glared at the two. "Get moving." "Oh, right," Ryan said, pulling a parchment from his pocket. Its edges were crisp with age and slightly burnt. As soon as it was exposed, a faint glow emanated from the runes inscribed on its surface. Then he began folding it as he walked toward the den. Chapter 205, A Deal's a Deal. Ryan stepped up to the doorway, peeking inside before turning back. "Come with me, man. I'm seriously freaking out." Leroy sighed, rubbing his eyes as he walked over. Evelyn pursed her lips but then lit up when she spotted Williams. She skipped over, grinning. 10 grand, and I'll fix you up right now. She pointed at Williams' hand. At this point, his hand had already turned a nasty shade of purple, an ice shard still lodged in his palm. 100. Williams shot back, holding up a single finger. "Just 10 grand. Williams hesitated, then held up 5 fingers. Evelyn's eyes sparkled. She was just about to agree. 500. Williams' voice was completely indifferent. Evelyn had already reached for his hand, but the moment she heard that number, she froze. "How much?" She stared at him wide-eyed. 50. You. 10. All right, fine. 500. Evelyn pouted, giving up the haggling. While she treated him, Williams was half expecting her to pull some kind of trick, but surprisingly, she didn't. Within moments, the ice shard melted away. A soft golden glow wrapped around his hand, and before long, the pain had vanished completely. Then, Evelyn fished some bandages out of her bag and tossed them over. "Wrap it yourself. You'll be fine in 3 days." She glanced at his hand. "Good thing it didn't hit the tendons. Otherwise, that hand of yours? Gone. And fixing it would cost at least 100 grand. Williams pulled a crumpled $100 bill from his pocket and handed it over. "We agreed on 500, Evelyn huffed, puffing out her cheeks. Williams smirked. "You said, and I quote, fix you up right now. But now you're telling me I still need 3 days. Or we could just forget the whole thing," Williams said, making a move to pocket the money. Evelyn snatched it back immediately, mumbling, "You people are all scammers. We gave you the intel and you promised payment. Now the money's gone, and we've got the 9th Division breathing down our necks. Relax. I was just messing with you." Williams grinned. "I really am broke, though. When Ethan gets back, you'll get your money." Evelyn's eyes brightened. "For real?" "Of course." Williams watched her carefully. There was something in his gaze. Something strange. Ever since he'd seen her, an old, hazy memory kept flickering through his mind. It had been years since he'd forced himself to forget that face. "I'll help you wrap it," Evelyn said, snatching the bandages from his hands. She crouched down in front of him, carefully tending to his wound. Williams forcibly turned his attention away, focusing instead on Victor, who was still fighting the mutant. The guy's whole body gleamed with a metallic sheen, and whenever Victor's fists connected, it rang out like metal striking a steel pipe. But Williams wasn't worried, he could tell. Victor was just using him for practice. Watching Victor, Williams couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. Of the 3 of them, Leo had always been the one most likely to become an energy user. Victor, on the other hand, was the least likely. He was already past the prime age for pushing human limits. It should have been impossible for him to achieve it. And yet, after Ethan, Victor had been the first among them to break through. If Williams had his own energy, that ice spike wouldn't have injured him so easily. Meanwhile, Ethan had already chased his target to the outskirts of the city. His prey? Barefoot guy. Yeah, that was the only way to describe him now. His flip-flops had been lost somewhere along the way. He had nowhere left to run. Sure, every leap he took covered a ridiculous distance, but compared to Ethan, who had already activated his travel form, he didn't stand a chance. As he ran, Ethan pulled out his phone, activating the speed tracking feature. One thing was now certain: the attributes granted by Ethereal's gear could be used in the real world. However, active abilities were still unusable. He had tested double jump and swift stride from his boots earlier, but they didn't seem to work. Once travel form kicked in, though, his speed kept climbing. The passive effect from Twilight Warspear was working perfectly. After multiple tests, Ethan confirmed that while in Ethereal it only took 30 seconds to reach max speed. In reality, however, it took closer to 2 minutes, but once he hit that peak, the speed remained constant. Still, as his legs moved faster and faster, it was an insane feeling, almost weightless like the Flash. Each stride launched him meters ahead. Barefoot guy turned back, eyes filled with sheer terror. He couldn't believe someone was outrunning him on foot. Ethan's smirk widened from the thrill. From a side view, his form had changed. He was now half Cervidian. His human legs had fused into the front legs of a stag, while behind him, the shadowy outline of a deer's body flickered with every step. Each bound sent power surging through his legs, as the phantom hind legs pushed off alongside his own. Less than 100 meters to go. One more burst of speed, and he could slam this guy into the pavement. But then, everything turned black. Not just his vision, his very soul sense was swallowed by darkness. It was as if something had devoured a kilometer-wide chunk of reality. Ethan's heart dropped. Then, just as suddenly, a blinding light erupted. The violent shifts between pitch black and searing brightness stabbed into his retinas, sending pain tearing through his skull. His instincts screamed. He clenched his eyes shut and skidded to a stop. For the next 10 agonizing seconds, the cycle repeated: light, dark, light, dark. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the anomaly vanished. The world returned to normal and Barefoot guy was gone. Ethan stood frozen. What just happened? Looking around, nothing.
No traces.
Even at Barefoot guy's fastest speed, he shouldn't have been able to outrun Ethan's soul sense. No, someone had intervened. And whoever it was, they could control light and darkness itself. Ethan felt a cold sweat trickling down his back. If that person had chosen to attack instead of just rescuing his target, would he have stood a chance? I need to get the hell out of here. Shaking off the unease, Ethan turned and sprinted back toward the others. Had Ryan managed to capture Jade's spirit? That was the key to keeping Rowan and the others alive. If they did, he needed answers. Why had Jade hated him so much? And just how had she even died? As he ran, his phone rang. He picked and Victor's voice came through. We're clear. Cops showed up. Did they give you any trouble? Ethan asked. Nah. We flashed the 9th Division badge, and they let us go. Ethan exhaled. At least one thing had gone right tonight. Chapter 206. Neighborhood hazing. The cops told Victor that they understood the situation and that they'd take care of things from here. At the same time, Victor informed Ethan that they were heading to the Mercer Wellness Center. He told Ethan to meet them there, using the address on the business card. Because Ryan had said that was the only place where he could get the broodmother to cooperate. Ethan immediately understood. This meant Ryan had succeeded. Jade had been captured. If that was the case, then they might as well go. Hopefully, she would voluntarily remove the ghost parasites from Rowan and the others. More importantly, they needed to figure out how she had died and why she hated him so much. Once they reached the city, Ethan flagged down a taxi. He gave the driver the destination and promptly dozed off in the back seat. The lunar beam skill had drained most of his soul power, and even the lake within his mindscape had receded slightly. As soon as the car started moving, exhaustion overtook him. The driver woke him when they arrived. Ethan stepped out of the car and found himself standing in front of the Mercer Wellness Center. However, the shutters were down. Just as he was about to call Victor, he heard someone shout, "Ethan! Over here!" He turned toward the voice and saw Evelyn standing at the corner of the street, waving frantically. Ethan hurried over. "Well?" she asked cautiously. "What?" Her sudden question caught him off guard. "The rubber man. Did you catch him?" she asked, glancing behind Ethan as if expecting to see the captive. No, he got away," Ethan replied nonchalantly. "What?" Evelyn suddenly stopped in her tracks, her face a mix of disbelief and frustration. "You idiot! How could you let him escape? What the hell? Who are you calling an idiot?" You. If he's gone, and he reports this to the 9th Division, we're done for." Her eyes were almost welling up with tears. Ethan had been annoyed by her calling him an idiot, but seeing her on the verge of crying made him feel awkward. He hated when women cried. He understood her fear. She was worried about the repercussions from the 9th Division. Well, Ethan started, trying to think of something comforting to say. But Evelyn shot him a fierce glare, turned on her heel and ran off. Naturally, Ethan followed. He caught up to her in a few strides and grabbed her arm. "Help! Someone's assaulting me!" Evelyn suddenly screamed. "Oh crap," Ethan thought, his heart sinking. What was this girl up to now? Then he saw the devilish grin on Evelyn's face, as she continued shouting, "Help! Someone's assaulting me!" Pedestrians and shopkeepers turned to look. Ethan, who had just been in a fight, looked haggard and had a torn sleeve from where a whip had struck him. In contrast, Evelyn was a pretty young girl with tears welling in her eyes, looking utterly pitiful. "Shut up!" Ethan shouted, growing increasingly irritated. But his outburst only made things worse. In an instant, a crowd surrounded him. A few older men even grabbed his arms. Ethan sighed. These were just ordinary people, good Samaritans with no ill intentions. He couldn't fight back. If he wanted to, these elderly men wouldn't stand a chance, as he could send them sprawling. But they were just trying to help, thanks to Evelyn's false alarm. Several men in their 60s and 70s twisted Ethan's arms with surprising strength. Ethan, not wanting to hurt the elderly bystanders, allowed himself to be restrained. He looked up at Evelyn, who was now wearing a triumphant, mischievous grin. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" Ryan asked as he walked up behind her, watching the scene unfold. "Nothing much. Just teaching this guy a lesson." Evelyn turned to her older brother, excitedly recounting what had just happened. Ryan listened, then gave her a once-over and said flatly, "Evelyn, did a donkey kick you in the head or something?" Evelyn froze for a moment, then exploded like a tiger cub having its tail stepped on. "Ryan, how dare you insult me? Do you want me to tell Leroy when we get home?" "Oh, go ahead. It's not like we've been paid for the intel or the spirit capture yet, Ryan replied, his tone still indifferent. And in a few days, if we don't pay the rent for the shop. At this, Evelyn's face fell, and she looked troubled. She stomped her foot in frustration and pushed her way through the crowd of elderly onlookers. Ethan, meanwhile, was crouching on the ground, looking utterly puzzled by the whole situation. As Evelyn squeezed her way into the crowd, an elderly woman suddenly spoke up with a smile. All right, let him go." Before Ethan could process what was happening, the woman took Evelyn's hand and said warmly, "Evelyn, dear, this young man seems nice. Much better than the last few." Ethan's mind was flooded with questions. What is she talking about? "Oh, Mrs. Thompson, those other guys were real creeps," Evelyn protested. "Ah, so this one's not then?" Mrs. Thompson teased. Evelyn's face turned red, and she suddenly looked both embarrassed and flustered. Since middle school, she had used this trick to scare off persistent admirers. The boys would usually run off screaming, and some even tried to fight back, only to be tackled by the elderly crowd. Afterward, they would avoid her like the plague. A few had even tried underhanded tactics, like slipping some things into her drink. But Evelyn, having been trained by Dr. Aldrich from a young age, was practically immune to most toxins. The last guy who tried ended up with 8 broken ribs, courtesy of Leroy, and a 3-year curse from Ryan that supposedly brought bad luck. Whether the curse worked or not, it didn't kill him, but it did spread rumors that anyone who pursued Evelyn would suffer misfortune. After that, the number of suitors dwindled, though a few still tried their luck from time to time. Usually, Evelyn would have disappeared by now, but this time she stayed put. The elderly crowd, having watched her grow up, couldn't resist teasing her. They had all been neighbors for years and had taken care of the 3 siblings after Dr. Aldrich disappeared. Without their help, the siblings might have starved during their first year on their own. Even the rent for the Mercer Wellness Center was 3 months overdue, but the landlord, also an old neighbor, had let it slide. Ryan clapped his hands. "All right, show's over. Head home. The rest are at the manor." Ethan sprang to his feet the second he got the chance. The elderly crowd laughed and began dispersing, leaving with teasing smiles. "Ryan, aren't you coming? Did you deal with that thing?" Evelyn asked, careful not to mention Ghost in front of so many people. Ryan paused mid-turn. I used a bit of Leroy's blood to suppress it for now, but that halfling's blood won't cut it. I need blood from a purebred black dog to make a proper spirit-binding charm." Ethan barely stopped himself from choking on his own laughter. Was Ryan seriously calling his brother a half-bred dog? Chapter 207. Strange Code. After saying goodbye to Ryan, Evelyn led the way. She didn't say a word, and Ethan was more than happy to enjoy the silence. Who knew what kind of trouble she... Soon they arrived at a large walled estate. The gate was made of redwood, a rare sight in this part of the city. In fact, such a private, standalone courtyard was almost unheard of in Ember City. Above the gate hung a beautiful ornate carving that read, "Mercer Manor." Ethan's eyes widened. This is some serious wealth, he thought. In the middle of a sprawling metropolis, this place had somehow escaped the clutches of urban development. As he glanced at the plaque on the wall beside the gate, he understood why. Historic Landmark Building. The plaque bore 3 large words, with smaller text below explaining its historical significance. Ethan didn't bother reading the details. He followed Evelyn as she pushed open the redwood gate and stepped inside. The moment they entered, Ethan saw Victor and Williams sitting at a stone table in the courtyard. To his surprise, Leo, who had been missing for a while, was also there. Ethan paused, then walked over and asked, "Leo, where have you been?" "Ethan." Leo waved, greeting him with a smile. But when Ethan asked his question, Leo's expression turned awkward. "Don't even ask. I got hungry on the way to the hospital and saw a street vendor selling burrito. I asked if anyone wanted some, but you guys were too busy listening to Williams ramble about that water spirit nonsense. No one answered me, so I got one for myself. It was so good, I decided to grab a few more for you guys. But when I went to pay, I realized my phone and wallet were gone. Can you believe it? Someone actually pickpocketed me. I had to talk my way out of paying the vendor. Since I couldn't reach you, I went to the ICU to look for you, but you were gone. I had no choice but to head back to the gym and find Celia. I tried calling you, but no one answered. Finally, I got through just now, so I borrowed Celia's phone and came straight here." Leo rambled on for a while, and Ethan listened with a furrowed brow. When Leo finished, Ethan pulled out his phone, tapped on Leo's profile, and played a 59-second voice message. "This wasn't you?" Ethan asked. The message was nothing but static. Zzz, hiss, zzz. Both Victor and Williams had heard the message before. They looked at Leo, curious for his response. Leo shook his head and pointed to the timestamp on the message. "Look at the time. By then, I was already back at the gym." He then pulled out Celia's phone, scrolled through the call log, and showed them the time of his call. It was a few minutes earlier than the voice message. Ethan nodded. "I already knew it wasn't you when I figured out what the message meant." This only deepened the confusion for Victor and Williams. When Ethan had first played the message for them, he'd asked if they could decipher it. Both had listened carefully but found nothing unusual. Ethan had even joked, "Is it Morse code?" But neither of them had any clue. So how had Ethan figured it out? Seeing their confused expressions, Ethan picked up a stone and began etching symbols into the dirt. As the strange buzzing and hissing sounds continued, he made the connection. Each buzzing sound was a 0, and each hissing sound was a 1. By the time Ethan was done, the courtyard of Mercer Manor was covered with a dense grid of 0s and 1s. Using the stone, he circled the first 2 lines of numbers. 01101001100110000100011000000100000100011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100110011001100 11000 110 11000 110. He pointed to the first line and said, "This is basic binary code." The first line translates to the word trap, and the second line is illusion. The rest of the sequence spells out little girl. When I figured this out, I knew it couldn't have been Leo who sent this message. But whoever did is clearly someone who knows me well. My major is software engineering, and this is basic stuff for me. The real question is, who sent it? And why steal Leo's phone to do it? Because of this message, I paid extra attention to that little girl, and sure enough, I noticed something unusual about her. Ethan spoke confidently, leaving Leo, Victor, and Williams utterly baffled. Leo rubbed his head and muttered, "Who the hell sends messages like this? It's way too complicated. You'd have to be crazy or just plain stupid." As soon as he finished speaking, the gate creaked open, and Ryan walked in. He was carrying a bottle, presumably filled with the purebred black dog's blood he'd been searching for. Evelyn, hearing the gate, came out of the house and saw him. She shouted excitedly, "Ryan, you're back!" The moment she spoke, someone burst out of the house. Crash. Bang. Thud. Ethan, Victor, Leo, and Williams watched in stunned silence at first, then winced as the beating continued. Eventually, they just looked bored. Meanwhile, Evelyn grabbed a small stool, sat down, and started munching on sunflower seeds, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of Ryan getting pummeled by Leroy. The fight lasted a solid 15 minutes. Finally, Leroy, exhausted, stopped and stood there panting. Ryan, who had been covering his head the entire time, slowly lowered his arms. His face was completely unharmed, but he wore a pitiful expression as he whined, "Dude, why'd you hit me?" Leroy, still catching his breath, glared at him. "You've got some nerve asking me that. You said you needed my blood for the spirit-binding charm, and I let you take it, didn't I? Then you went out looking for a purebred black dog. That's what you said, right?" Ryan, realizing what had happened, pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. "Evelyn, you—" Before he could finish, he suddenly passed out. Evelyn stood up, walked over, and gave him a light kick. "Humph. Ryan, that's what you get for insulting me." Leroy, confused, blinked at Evelyn. "Eve, what did Ryan say to you? Should I beat him up again?" Evelyn waved her hand dismissively. "Thanks, big bro, but it's fine. I don't know what you think, but I couldn't stand him calling you a mutt." She then knelt beside Ryan, her hands glowing with a faint yellow aura, and began healing his wounds. Her energy was truly remarkable. Within seconds, the bruises covering Ryan's body faded away. The whole scene played out in front of Ethan and the others. They exchanged glances, each seeing the same mix of disbelief and amusement in the other's eyes. They wanted to laugh but weren't sure if they should. Their sides were practically hurting from holding it in. Ethan didn't know whether to be concerned. One sibling snitched, the other snapped and dished out a full-on beatdown. The victim fainted more from sheer outrage than actual injuries, and now the instigator was casually healing him like nothing happened. It was the most dysfunctional yet oddly efficient family dynamic he had ever seen. But just as they thought the drama was over, they realized it was only the beginning. Chapter 208, Spirit Grudge. It was already late, and Ryan had long since woken up. Ethan turned to him and asked, "How's Jade doing? Can we talk to her?" The moment he asked, everyone's eyes were on him. Ethan quickly explained, "She's the spirit. She used to be my high school classmate." His explanation only made things worse. The looks he got from the group grew even more suspicious. Williams, who rarely spoke, gave him a strange look and said, "Ethan, you didn't, sleep with her and then ditch her, did you?" As soon as he said it, everyone's expressions shifted to one of understanding, as if they'd just pieced together some scandalous story. Evelyn, on the other hand, looked at Ethan with disgust. Leo, sitting next to Ethan, was completely lost. He tilted his head and asked, "Who's Jade? What spirit? And does Lila know about this whole sleeping with her thing?" "She knows." "Wait, no." Ethan blurted out instinctively, then quickly corrected himself. "What are you all talking about? We were just classmates." He then recounted how he'd run into Jade, how he'd bought the gym in a fit of anger, and how he'd ended up firing her. Only then did the group seem to understand. But they were still curious. Why did Jade hate Ethan so much? Why had she lunged at him, even as the whip struck her, with such ferocity? Being fired couldn't possibly explain that level of hatred, could it? Even Ethan was puzzled. That's why he'd asked Ryan if they could communicate with Jade. He wanted to know how she had died and why she harbored such intense hatred toward him. Ryan checked the time. His words were slightly slurred from biting his tongue during the earlier beating. "We can try, but it's not the right time yet. We'll have to wait until midnight." "But—" He paused. He stopped again, waiting for Ethan's response. Ethan understood what Ryan was implying. After a moment of thought, he said, "If we destroy her, what happens to Rowan and the others? The 4 in the hospital?" As soon as Ethan finished speaking, Ryan turned to look at Evelyn. Ethan, confused, followed his gaze. "Why are you looking at me? You haven't paid me a single cent yet." "I'm not doing anything for free." Evelyn shot Ethan a glare and went back to munching on sunflower seeds. Ethan chuckled awkwardly and pulled out his phone. "All right, boss, let's settle the bill. How much do I owe you?" Evelyn's eyes lit up. She pulled out a calculator from who knows where and started tapping away. Ethan was stunned. Who carries a calculator around with them? After a flurry of button presses, she named her price. $20,000. Ethan didn't bother haggling. In Ethereal, a single high-grade instant health potion cost more than that. He transferred the money without a second thought. Evelyn looked disappointed when she realized Ethan wasn't going to negotiate. "I should have asked for more," she thought. But then she added, "Oh, and there's also the security fee. Since you didn't catch that rubber man from the 9th Division, our safety is now at risk. That'll be another $200,000. Ethan rolled his eyes. "That's not my fault. I almost had him. But then I ran into something strange." He went on to describe the strange black and white phenomenon he'd encountered. Ryan suddenly interrupted. "Dude, if you're going to lie, at least make it believable." "Huh?" Ethan was taken aback. "Why don't you just say you ran into Winter and Summer at the same time? If you don't want to pay, just say so." Ryan rolled his eyes, clearly not buying Ethan's story. He thought Ethan was making things up to avoid paying. Being doubted like that seriously annoyed Ethan. "What the hell are you talking about, Winter and Summer? Explain yourself properly." Ryan straightened his back and, out of nowhere, recited. "Beyond the northwestern sea, past the blood-stained tides of Redwater, there leath hollow shade peak, veiled in mist and shadowed woe. There dwelleth the god, whose face is man's, yet whose form doth coil like the serpent, crimson as spilled blood, with eyes that waver not, nor ever close in sleep. When those dread orbs shut fast, night's black veil descendeth, and when they yawn once more, the world is drowned in blinding light. A breath from his lips calleth forth the winter's howling wrath, a weary sigh unshackleth the sun's burning ire. He taketh no meat, knoweth no slumber, nor been death to toil or rest. For wind and rain be but his messengers, heralding his will. After finishing, Ryan sat there smugly, as if he just dropped some profound wisdom. Everyone waited for him to continue, but he just stopped there. Thud. Speak English, damn it. Leroy suddenly kicked Ryan, sending him tumbling off his stool. Ow! Dude, can you not resort to violence every damn time? I'll stop when you stop talking nonsense. Ethan and the others were at a loss for words. These two were a riot. Ryan picked up his stool, looking aggrieved. Is it that hard to understand? What I meant was, there's a so-called deity on a mountain with a serpent's body and a human face. When it opens its eyes, night turns to day. When it closes them, day turns to night. Its breath brings winter, and its exhalation brings summer. It's called the Abyssal Dragon, but some people also call it Candle Abyss. There's also some other bizarre beliefs concerning this entity. I won't go into detail. At this point, Ethan, Victor, and the others were wide-eyed. Ethan shot to his feet. These bizarre beliefs, that the candle is a type of parasite, and that abyss is the serpent part. The parasite usually clings to the serpent's body, making up its scales. And I've made a slight change to chapter 157, where Doe explains the origins of the candle abyss. Feel free to check back on that chapter. Hearing Ethan's words, Ryan was stunned into silence. He stood up and looked at Leroy. See? I told you and Evelyn earlier. He's just trying to avoid paying. If he knows such an archaic legend, he's definitely messing with us. And you said he wasn't that kind of person. Leroy, after hearing Ethan's explanation, also stared at him intently for a moment. But then he said, you two only care about money. If it weren't for them today, would the three of us even be alive? The $20,000 is enough to cover the rent. After Leroy's words, both Evelyn and Ryan fell silent. Ethan sat back down, and Victor, Leo, and Williams exchanged glances. They all had the same thought. The person Ethan had encountered was likely Celeste. But why had Celeste saved that guy? Ethan, that voice message. Victor asked tentatively. Ethan nodded. She's my senior, from the same major as me. Victor suddenly understood. The mystery of Leo's missing phone was solved. With Celeste's skills, it would have been easy for her to pickpocket Leo. That meant the binary message had also been sent by her, using a method only a programmer like Ethan would understand. As for why she'd done it, it was likely to avoid surveillance or for some other reason. But why had she intervened to save that guy? That part still didn't make sense. Celeste must already be working with the enemy. Did that mean the rubber guy was part of that mysterious organization? At first, they'd assumed the team they fought today was part of the 9th Division. But still, none of them could believe the 9th Division could be that ruthless, that inhumanly cold. Chapter 209, 3 Factions. Everyone quieted down. Even Evelyn and Ryan, who had been eyeing Ethan and the others with suspicion, could sense something was off. Though they still harbored thoughts of squeezing more money out of the situation, they wisely chose to keep their mouths shut. The courtyard fell into silence. After a while, it was Ethan who broke the quiet. Why are you all so afraid of the 9th Division? The moment he asked the question, the 3 Chase siblings stared at him in shock. Ryan shook his head and walked out of the room without a word. Evelyn pursed her lips and turned away, refusing to look at him. Leroy hesitated for a moment before cautiously asking, You're not new recruits to the 9th Division, are you? Ethan and his companions exchanged awkward glances before slowly nodding. Leroy's expression shifted to one of realization, as if he had expected this. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated, leaving the room in suspense. Finally, Evelyn stepped in. You do know that the 9th Division is split into 3 factions, right? Ethan's curiosity was piqued. This was news to him. Care to fill us in? Do we need to pay you for this info? Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. Evelyn took a deep breath, ready to explain, but then seemed to deflate. Forget it. No amount of money will help us now. We can't stay here much longer anyway. Sooner or later we'll have to leave. It's just, when Grandpa comes back, he won't find us. Her voice trailed off, and tears welled up in her eyes. She began to sob softly. Ethan and his friends were taken aback by her sudden emotional outburst. Leroy quickly moved to comfort her. From Leroy's words, Ethan pieced together the reason for Evelyn's distress. The courtyard they were standing in was about to be seized. The property, a historically protected building, had been gifted to the state by Dr. Aldrich, their grandfather. But since his disappearance over a year ago, the family's right to live there was hanging by a thread. If Dr. Aldrich wasn't declared dead within the next few months, they would lose their residency rights. Eviction was inevitable. Evelyn had been holding on to hope that her grandfather would return one day. That hope had kept her going, even as she struggled to keep the Mercer Wellness Center afloat. After Leroy managed to calm Evelyn down, he turned back to Ethan and the others, picking up where Evelyn had left off. Ethan and his friends were not only new to the 9th Division but also completely unaware of the hidden world that existed beneath the surface of ordinary society. They were like complete novices, unfamiliar with the rules and intricacies of this secretive organization. Through their conversation with Leroy, they began to learn more. The 9th Division was currently divided into 3 factions: the Originalists, the Dissenters, and the Unaligned. The Dissenters had emerged within the last 30 years. They had begun to handle matters in their own way, disregarding the original rules and regulations of the 9th Division. Their methods were more brutal and efficient, but they often crossed ethical lines. The Originalists, on the other hand, had repeatedly tried to curb the rise of the Dissenters. But the Dissenters didn't play by the rules, making them a formidable and unpredictable force. Over the years, many of the old guard from the Originalists had mysteriously died off. As a result, the Originalists had begun to decline, while the Dissenters gradually took control of the 9th Division. The Unaligned, as the name suggested, were those who hadn't joined either faction. They lived quietly, avoiding contact with the 9th Division as much as possible. In essence, they were the outcasts of the organization. Most were either new recruits or individuals without enough power to be worth recruiting by either faction. There were also a few older members who wanted to quietly exit the 9th Division, disillusioned by its direction. In short, the Unaligned had the least influence within the 9th Division. Initially, the Chase siblings had hoped Ethan and his group were part of the Originalists, believing they might offer some protection. But when they learned that Ethan and his friends were new recruits, they assumed they were unaligned. This realization left Evelyn deeply frustrated. Now, Evelyn was ready to give up on her grandfather's legacy, Dr. Aldrich's estate, and leave to lay low for a while. As Leroy explained all this, Ethan and his companions began to piece things together. Was the mysterious organization Celeste had mentioned, the one infiltrating the 9th Division, actually manipulating the Dissenters from behind the scenes? If so, it made sense why Celeste had intervened to save the Rubber Man earlier. Thinking back, it was no wonder Celeste had urged them to leave the 9th Division when they were in Shadowlink's village. The situation was far more complicated than they had imagined. At the time, Celeste had been severely weakened by the Shadow Eater parasite and had been on the brink of death. She had seen potential in Ethan, hoping to introduce him to Director Vaughn. Her plan was for Ethan to infiltrate the enemy's ranks. If that was the case, Celeste and Vaughn were likely part of the Originalists. But plans rarely go as expected. Not only had Celeste survived, but through a twist of fate, and with the combined efforts of Morzin and Ethan, she had managed to fully absorb Doe's soul energy and gain control over the drum, a relic that granted her the ability to command the legendary creature, Candle Abyss. Though, in Ethan's opinion, Candle Abyss wasn't as formidable as the legends made it out to be. Earlier, he had seen its power extend only about a kilometer, creating a stark contrast between light and darkness. While impressive, it was far from the world-altering force the stories described. Ethan glanced at his watch. It was almost midnight. Just as he was about to ask where Ryan had gone, he heard a shout from outside. "It's time. Come out and help." Ethan and his friends stepped outside to find Ryan dressed in a traditional robe, holding a wooden sword. They weren't sure what kind of wood it was, but they guessed it might be peach wood, given the outfit's resemblance to the iconic ghost hunting movies that had once been wildly popular. Ryan stood in front of a table laden with incense and ritual items, looking every bit the part of a seasoned exorcist. He waved the wooden sword around dramatically, though Ethan and the others had no idea what he was doing. If they had to guess, based on movies and TV shows, he was probably performing some kind of ritual. Just then, Leroy emerged from the house and called out, "Ryan, stop messing around. They're unaligned." Ryan froze mid-swing, nearly twisting his back. He turned to Leroy, confused. "What did you say?" Leroy glanced at Ethan and his friends, a little embarrassed, but repeated, "I said, they just joined the 9th Division. Damn it. What a waste of effort. I thought we'd finally caught a break with a couple of energy users, one of whom can even project his soul sense. I was hoping we could avoid disaster this time. Ryan threw the wooden sword to the ground in frustration, yanked off his robe, and tossed it aside. He grabbed a black clay jar from the table and hurled it toward Ethan. Chapter 210. Spirit in the Jar. Ryan watched as Ethan caught the jar. Break the seal and ask whatever you want. After that, figure out how to deal with it yourself, he said, then turned and walked away. The whole situation left Ethan and his friends completely baffled. How do we deal with it? Destroy it? What about the people in the hospital? Ethan called after him. Ryan didn't respond, but Leroy, standing nearby, answered instead. Before you got here, Evelyn already went to the hospital. Everything's fine there now. Fine? Ethan was taken aback. Yeah, Leroy said with a sigh. It's not like we didn't have a way to deal with the ghost parasites before. We were just worried that if we cured one person, it might alert the cursecaster and put the other 3 in danger. We were trying to track down the source. We thought reporting it to the 9th Division might help us earn some extra cash. But, well, you see how that turned out. If you hadn't shown up when you did, the 3 of us would probably be dead by now. Leroy shook his head, his expression heavy with frustration. Listening to him, Ethan realized that despite their money-grubbing exterior, the Chase siblings had good hearts. Otherwise, they wouldn't have rushed to the hospital to help Rowan and the others as soon as they returned. Ethan held the jar in his hands, torn about what to do. Ryan had warned him that if Jade's spirit went out of control, they'd have no choice but to destroy it. No matter how much bad blood there had been between Ethan and Jade in the past, they were still old classmates. Their feud hadn't reached the point where he'd want to kill her. Besides, he'd already gotten his revenge when he got her fired and humiliated her. She'd even returned the bracelet Lila had given him. And now she was dead. If they destroyed her spirit, she'd most definitely lose any chance of reincarnation. Ethan hadn't believed in reincarnation before, but after his trip to the underworld, he knew it was real. Sure, the journey was fraught with dangers, like the strange man at the bridge who slaughtered spirits and the monstrous fish in the river of blood. But there was still a chance to make it through. If Jade's spirit was destroyed here, that chance would be gone forever. But if he didn't open the jar, he'd never know how she'd become a spirit in the first place. If her death was somehow his fault, he'd never be able to live with himself. As Ethan stood there, lost in thought, the jar was suddenly snatched from his hands. I've never seen a real ghost before. Wait! Rip! Before Ethan could stop him, Leo, who had been standing right next to him, tore off the spirit-binding charm sealing the jar. Boom! The jar exploded. Ethan's heart sank. A thick white mist poured out, filling the courtyard and obscuring everyone's vision. Strangely, the mist didn't spread beyond the courtyard walls. Ethan immediately expanded his soul sense, but as it reached the edge of the courtyard, he felt a slight resistance, as if he'd hit a thin, invisible barrier. He noticed a faint shimmering light enveloping the entire property. Impressive. This place is protected by a magic barrier. The mist dissipated as quickly as it had appeared. When everyone's vision cleared, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for 2 people who looked visibly uneasy. One was Ethan, his face filled with concern. The other person who looked uneasy was Leo, who was usually the joker of the group. But now, his face was pale, and his entire body was drenched, as if he'd been dunked in water. Victor and Williams noticed something was off immediately. Leo stood with his eyes closed, head bowed. Steam rose from his body, as if he were sweating out a lifetime's worth of moisture. A puddle had already formed at his feet. Jade? Ethan asked cautiously. Ethan? Leo's voice came out in a strange, distorted mix of male and female tones, sending chills down everyone's spines. His eyes, now completely white and pupilless, locked onto Ethan. Victor glanced at Leo, frowned, and hesitated for a moment before leaning in to whisper something in Ethan's ear. Ethan's expression shifted slightly after hearing it. I want you dead, Leo said, his voice still eerily dual-toned, before lunging at Ethan. Williams moved to intercept him, but Victor grabbed his arm and shook his head, holding him back. In that brief moment, Leo reached Ethan and wrapped his hands around Ethan's throat. Ethan didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, letting Leo's hands tighten around his neck. Jade, stop messing around, Ethan said calmly. At his words, Leo's body jerked as if electrocuted. He released Ethan and stumbled back several steps. Ethan smiled faintly, I told you can't scare him, Ryan said, stepping out of the house. He was carrying a large, soaking wet teddy bear, clearly just pulled from a water barrel. He tossed the bear in front of Leo and added, "If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today."